I am so excited today to welcome DeWayne Johnson. He is our guest podcaster for the day, and we are going to talk about what is kind of a taboo topic. It's one of the most important aspects of everybody's personal and professional life. However, we often try not to talk about it, and that is money. So, DeWayne, you were, I'm not going to say fortunate enough because these things don't happen by accident, but you were disciplined enough
I like
to
that.
be able, you were disciplined enough to be able to participate and leverage the FIRE movement to retire in your 30s. So great kudos to you. And then you've leveraged the flexibility that early retirement has given you to become an excellent community builder. And you're very involved in providing and building resources for some really important groups in the Valdosta area. And so we're going to talk about all of that later. But first, let's talk about the money. So we had a lot of questions. Students were very interested in this. And so I appreciate you being willing to have such a frank conversation with us about this topic. And so I'll just go ahead and ask the first question that was posed, and that is, when entering the workforce after college, was retiring early one of your goals, or did it just happen? And kind of, when did you discover the FIRE movement? Really, what got you started in it?
Yeah, okay. So that's a sort of a rifle shot of questions there, but let's see. So one, I guess I could say retiring early was not the initial plan. And let me pause and actually preface. Thank you for having me on. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for the students that asked all of these abundant questions. They're right on time, and I definitely commend the students for being bold and wanting to know about FIRE community and what we got going on in Valdosta. But yes, going back to that though, it wasn't part of the necessarily the initial plan at all. It's just that I happened to be raised with an awareness of money, and I say that because my mom, rest her soul, she wasn't necessarily great with money, but my dad was. So that's a little peek into the dynamic of our family. It's like, there's always, this marital turmoil, if you will, when it comes to bills being paid, credit card bills going up or down. And so I got a chance to see a little bit of that, unfortunately, in some cases, because of course that money is one of the main reasons why couples argue. And so to be honest and frank, that was a lot of what I saw. But my upbringing with regards to education, I was a high achiever in education, math and science. So that laid the groundwork. And of course, being raised in a very high structured household, you kind of put the two together. You do well in math. And so because of that, I sort of had this knack for numbers. And so with that, I also credit in high school, upperclassmen, probably 11th or 12th grade, I had the opportunity to participate in a stock market game. And that elevated also, because we won, my confidence in dealing with numbers and stock market. So had a little boost of confidence there early on. But primarily just the whole seeing what happens if you don't manage money well, what could happen, things, consequences with regards to, bill payments and all of that. So that was really my initial trigger coming out of high school. And then college, because of my just background of, like I said, with dealing with numbers, I always kept a budget. And so kind of fast forward through to get to the question, or at least the initial part of the question, it was more so just my affinity for just wanting to keep numbers straight. And in that, I found a way to where I always would want to complete my assignments quickly, efficiently, I say. So I finished my work early. I always have done that since I was in elementary school. And so because of that, I always found myself wanting to not necessarily work a 9 all the way to 5. So that was really, as you can probably see, was my trigger for just wanting to do something different. Because back then, this is me coming out of college in the early 2000s. It wasn't anything called a FIRE movement. but this whole element of wanting to get outside of the rat race wasn't what was a predominant area in my mindset, to where I just wanted to do something where I had more time to myself after completing an assignment. So that was really the main trigger. If you would just relay with me the next part of the question there.
Oh, what age did you really start investing? And
Yeah.
what age did you really start kind of making progress?
Yeah. So that was let's see, I'm just trying to think here. I would say probably around really right after college. I mean, yeah, because one thing that I don't like, I guess the people that kind of go against the grain are the ones that kind of stick out, better or worse. And so one thing that I didn't really jive with was 401k. And so
Mhm.
just kind of locking my money in for 40 years, being early 20s. And so I was like, there's got to be a different way. So I found out obviously you can self-direct your 401k. So I got into that. And then that's again before knowing more about the other avenues. But then there were some other tools out there, sort of like today we have, Acorn and Stockpile, et cetera, Robinhood. But back then it was something else. I forget what the name was. But I started playing around with investing, sort of offline, if you will, from the traditional 401k. So by doing that, I would stash money, it would grow, and I would have a little nest egg, if you will, for playtime. And so that kind of got me spun up on actually investing at an earlier age as far as the exiting college adult phase.
Yeah. Okay. So you have said so much that
Yeah.
we need to unpack. So that's awesome. I had a similar situation, but mine was the reverse. It was my mom who was really good with money. She could take a penny and turn it into a dime. And my dad, it was like always constantly trying to keep my dad kind of, in line
Yeah.
financially. And so it was interesting for me to watch my family where they never really had much,
Mhm.
but they never made, like they didn't make hardly any money.
Gotcha.
But because they were so good at managing it, we were able to live a much more comfortable lifestyle with no debt and any of those things because my mom was such a great money manager. So I was like, if I could combine that money management with actually earning money,
Yeah. Right.
it's like, well, I could be onto something there.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
I mean,
um,
it's because the thing is that when you said that, it just made me throw in this piece. I mean, then being an engineering student and graduate didn't hurt either because
right.
now I'm making money. So,
Right, right.
yeah,
Making money and managing it. So,
yeah,
but I want to go back to, you said something about confidence. And that I feel is one of the things that people really lack whenever it comes to all things money, whether it's budgeting or investing and, playing the stock market. And so can you talk a little bit about how somebody who maybe would not be a self-proclaimed, I'm great with numbers and I'm great with math, how would you recommend that somebody who doesn't have that confidence go about building it?
yeah. Start early. I think that when I was looking at I say a lot of the questions, a subset of the questions, really it comes down to starting early as possible, especially now since we're talking about collegiate level young adults. You've kind of got this halfway in, halfway out. You kind of got a shelter being in college, but at the same time, you're dealing with some of the responsibilities of adulthood. And hopefully that's the majority of people. I know some people are really footing the bill themselves. So excuse
Right.
me on that. But nonetheless, it's an opportunity to kind of test the waters as far as budgeting. One thing that I had when I was in college was I forget what it was called, but it was one of those student loans. And so when it would get sent to tech, because pretty much everything else was paid for, I would actually get a reimbursement check, basically an overage from what the government sent to the school. And so I actually used that. Obviously, I know the reimbursement was more so because I lived off campus. So I didn't use that sum amount for on campus housing. But nonetheless, so that gave me a lot to actually manage from a practice standpoint. So buying, the groceries for the apartment, and also paying rent for the apartment. And then of course, then in Atlanta, you go shopping, so you do some shopping. So you have some time to kind of play with some stuff. That can get people in trouble, but again, it goes back to, are you comfortable with it or not? You got a safety net with parents or whatnot. Um, I unfortunately didn't have to ever go to my parents, which I always am proud of that. But, it gave me an opportunity to sort of test the waters of this budget thing.
That is so interesting. I had a really similar experience, so I'm glad that you shared that. I would always take out the loans, but even though I didn't need them, the student loans, but I would only do the interest deferred portion.
Yep. Yep.
Then I would have that pot of money. I would either put it in CDs, so I was earning interest on it, but not paying interest on it.
Right.
And then as soon as I got the first, hey, it's due, I would just write the principal back, and then I had earned all of that interest for 4 years,
Yes.
on it. And so I think that's another thing, is getting comfortable the whole time. You mentioned starting early, so the time value of money, and then learning to use other people's money.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's
I like that. That's a good nugget there as well. I never thought about it. And so great. Kudos to that idea.
Yeah. So like I said, I was like, I'll get money anywhere that I can, but I don't want to spend it. You know what I mean? I don't want to spend it. I just want to use it to earn if I can. And so, okay. So that is, so a couple of things there. So even if somebody, because one of the questions is, if somebody, is it too late if somebody's wanting to start in their 40s? But it sounds like if you started right after college and you were able to retire at some point in your 30s, I mean, in about 15-ish years, you were able to accomplish your financial goals. And so if somebody's starting in their 40s, well before the typical retirement age of 67 now, you would be able to accomplish those goals. It would be able to happen. So we do have some in the class who are not the traditional, going straight from undergrad into the graduate MBA classes. So for those of you who are listening who are in the later 30s, in your 40s, the best time to start was yesterday, but the second best time to start is today.
Yeah. Yeah, the best time to start is now. I mean,
Right.
no matter who you are. And so, yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out because you're right. There is a perspective that I'm overlooking there because we're always talking about traditional college ages. But you're right. The span of time is approximately the same that, I used for that. So, yes, if you are in your late 30s and early 40s, you could definitely take advantage of today's market and today's real estate.
Yeah. So let's talk about that, getting started. That was one of the big sets of questions that students had as well. So what's the first step? Setting a goal. What should the mindset be as you're getting started? So talk about that whole getting started.
Yeah. So it's like I need to do my own. We talked about some of the authors, and I think I need to write a book as well because it's one of those things to where for me and for a lot of people that weren't necessarily raised with a lot of the non-traditional investing principles. I mean, I was not taught, stock market, outside of school, and I wasn't taught it in school. But nonetheless, and so, really it was all about just kind of, it does sort of blend in once we get into the networking piece. I'll refer back to this. But over time, I ended up getting more information that I could utilize to aggressively go after what I wanted to do, which was have more time to myself. And so I'll try to bring it back to this question though, what do you do as early as possible? I mean, the first thing is really as simple as budgeting, especially if you're not as comfortable with numbers and money. At the end of the day, break it down to the fact that it's just what's going out, expenses, and what's coming in as far as your revenue. It's addition and subtraction, which I hope everybody, is comfortable with. And at that point, it really is just being honest and transparent. And that's the big thing. We talked about how much of a taboo money is and can be in our society. And that's because a lot of people don't want to expose themselves even to themselves and just be
Yes,
honest.
that's a big one. Don't really want to expose the reality of the situation themselves. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's why I say that's a big part of it right there. I mean, just if you're budgeting right now, if you're tracking that, I mean, even when I got on job and met my wife, and I'm talking graduating 2001 from Georgia Tech, but not actually meeting my wife until 2000, goodness, 2006, 2000, 2008, I mean, I was still using spreadsheets. I mean, so if you're using spreadsheets, I mean, you're fine. I mean, I just like spreadsheets then because it was, early phase of all this tech. But at the end of the day, you can track it. You can automate some things if you're that comfortable, but you can just set out in a very nice format. Matter of fact, when I started in DC, I would just be off to the side and I take a little notepad, and every month I would just write down what I had to spend or pay for and what my expected expenses were. I just play with the numbers and translate that to an Excel spreadsheet. So like I say, just start with it, but you have to dedicate some time to that. Make it fun, make it challenging, try to beat the numbers, come under what you set your budget to. Once you start making it part of your lifestyle and your habits to go to it, that's when it becomes a part of your habitual routine.
I couldn't agree more with that. Ben and I say that, our love language is Excel. Our love
I like
language
that.
is spreadsheets. We, we're the same way. And it is, I think that making it part of your habit is a really big, important thing. And another thing that we have done that has been successful, and you mentioned this in your first answer in terms of financial discussions and financial tension being the cause of a lot of marital strife, the numbers become pretty black and white. And so if you've already set your goals, right? So like you said, what the in and the out is, then it's not a me against him or his want against my want. We've already agreed on what the goal is, and either it's there or it's not, right?
Yeah.
And so it isn't me telling him no or him telling me no. It's the spreadsheet.
Yeah, right.
It's
Yeah.
the spreadsheet saying it's not there.
Yeah. That's why I like math. I mean, I tell my kids, math is like, to me, I'll say it's the simplest thing because it's no ambiguity. It's either 1 or 0. It's not subjective to opinion. 1 + 1 is 2. And you can't really dispute that until you get in some higher level theoretical, math. But nonetheless, for what we're talking about, like you said, it's black and white.
Right. Yeah, exactly. This is a great question that one of the students asked. And it's, how do you view the relationship between financial independence and the pursuit of meaningful work, right? So there is this assumption that there's an inverse relationship between salary and meaningfulness of work. And so how would you suggest that somebody would balance those two, or how have you found that balance? And what is your advice for that?
I say first thing, it takes time. I think there is, unless you just happen to get that golden egg. Everything in life is just going to be unfair to a certain extent. There are going to be a lot of things that are just going your way to a certain extent, but you got to be able to be resilient to a lot of what happens in life. There's a whole nother podcast we can have about the things that I've gone through, but they are minuscule in comparison to all of my achievements and successes and accolades. But you have to go through something in order to get to where you're going. So I can tell you the answer to that question, but at the end of the day, the balance is driven by you, because what you're doing once you step into a career is you're literally working for someone else's dream, that business, that company. So, I'm working for Lockheed Martin. The name is Lockheed Martin. That's not my business. So my end goal when I come into work is to make that company more profitable by the tasking that I've been assigned. So at that point, it's about how do you, it's imbalanced, out the gate if you start that way. And so that's how a lot of us started. Old school, is just get a good job, retire, and, hopefully you have enough money to live off of that. But along the way, what I was doing was really being honest with myself. And I had someone, my wife, to actually explore that with. That, hey, here's what we would like for our family goals to be. Here's what I value. Here's what you value. How do we get to that point? And like I said, you got to sit down and talk this through with that counterpart that you have, or if you by yourself, with yourself, just be honest. And how do you get to that point? Because no matter what scenario you're in your career, it will change. If it's going well, it will change some way down the road. It's just a matter of time. And so I've always been the person to try to find what is the the alternative path that I need to set up for. What's the exit strategy, if you will, for this opportunity? What's the backup plan? And so I've always wanted to stash something away, and it turned into, well, let's make this stash actually do something for us, work for us. Then it turned into, let's make this stash actually be a vehicle for investment. To make this vehicle for investment grow even faster so that we can actually live off of this residual income. So as we get to those, those details and those technical details, but that's really, the mindset is just that there is an imbalance if you go to work for someone, which is fine, because you got to make money. You got to get the fuel for your investing that you want to do for that fire movement. There's nothing wrong with that. You look at the people who've experienced fire and been successful. The main thing is software engineers and whatnot. You just press down that expense category very, very, very trim, and use all of that cash that you're getting in on a biweekly, monthly cycle, and you're just fueling what your dreams are.
I really like that analogy, especially since it's literally called the fire movement.
Yeah,
It's so if you do
throw it in the fuel.
Yeah, if you do view those years of accumulating, the firewood to be able to have a long-lasting fire, like I said, there is built-in imbalance if you were working for somebody. And so instead of viewing it, what is the balance today, you kind of have to have a much longer perspective, which is why you said start as early as possible, right? There is going to be some imbalance. And it's going to be a lot of work while I'm pumping the fire, while I'm fueling it.
Yeah.
But then hopefully on the back end of that, and if you've made good decisions and been disciplined, then the balance comes back into play. So misconceptions. What are some of the misconceptions of the fire movement that you would like to address, or maybe some misconceptions that you've experienced?
I tell you, one thing about, again, we didn't necessarily know it was to be a fire movement, but now, there's this small community of fire individuals, if you will. And I say small relative to the number of people that just go to work and, churn out to retirement. So that's why I refer to it as small community. But then again, you look at the small number of individuals that we talked about before that really want to talk about money. All right. Small individuals that really want to do something that is against the grain, alternative. So, at the end of the day, the mindset really is a very unique mindset. So just repeat the question for me one more time, though, so I make sure I hit it.
So it was about misconceptions of fire, but you've said a couple times mindset. So I'm actually fine, like you're switching the gear, and I really want dive as deep as you can into what the mindset needs to be for fire to be successful.
But I'll even touch more because I missed the misconception part of that. So with the misconception, first thing that I thought about when listening the first time to the question before I got off track there was that the major misconception, I guess, is that you're just really going to sit back and go to the beach and all of this. You still have to find joy in what you're doing as far as your purpose in life, and so that will get us to the community building piece. But you've got to really find out how you do not become bored with this abundance of time that you said you wanted, and all of a sudden you have, and it's like, I want to go back to work. So
I never had that moment. Did you have that moment?
No. I tell you, if this was a couples type of interview, if you will, my wife would tell you I was never the one to want to work a full day. I've never been that way. And when I say that, it's like I'm into working smarter, not harder. I heard that from somebody, and that has always been internalized within me forever. So when I've always, like I said before, just kind of finished what I set out to do before 8 hours. It just never took 8 hours. So I was like, what's the point of this? And so that's really one of the indicators that you probably want to explore fire movement because you're going to burn yourself out. You're going to get frustrated or whatnot. You need to explore something that's going to get you beyond the work day. And so that was me.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, and so now let's do that deep
Yes,
dive
yes.
into the mindset, right? So you said a couple of things, alternatives, having an like looking at things from an alternative perspective, but really, because I think there are a few different things whenever you kind of dive into some of your influences, which for the students, there's going to be a curated reading list that accompanies this. So you'll be exposed to all of those things that he is mentioning. But some of them are like, oh, you can't you can only minimize your expenses so far, right? I mean,
Right.
you
That's
can
right.
minimize your expenses. Most
Yeah.
definitely,
Yeah. You cannot pay rent.
we all have a little fluff, right, in our
All right.
budget. There's room there, but you can only minimize your expenses so far, especially whenever you put things like children into the
Yep.
equation. And
Yeah.
so, really, if you aren't independently wealthy, or if you don't come from old money or medium new money, like what really is the mindset that will help you get enough of a starting pot from which to be able to invest and grow?
Yeah. And I like that, we're having this conversation, you and I, because of the backgrounds that we, explored earlier, is that again, I didn't come from, old money. I didn't come from anyone passed down, here's what you do. I like to talk to people about this and talk to college students because I'm like, if I did what I know now at your age, man, and so I'm glad
Yes,
I did
I
it,
know.
but man, I mean,
Yeah.
please y'all take advantage of this information and the resource you have in Dr. Watson here. But and so as far as mindset, I mean, it really does take special individuals. And so if you're also co-partnered or partnered in a team standpoint, these investment groups, whatnot, where people can be held softly accountable. But you need to have somebody, if it's not you, that is very disciplined. And, we touched on that earlier, but you've got to be disciplined about the numbers. And again, going back to where you initially mentioned that you can only shave off with so much. One thing, and again, I speak to my traditional age college students, is that you're living a college lifestyle now. So when you graduate, don't graduate to a flashy adult lifestyle when you get out. You're making a little money, so that's great, but don't do anything, with it, as far as going out buying cars and all that. That was one of the best things of advice I'd say that my dad, from a very structured yet frugal yet very guidance driven point of view that he gave me. And it wasn't because he wanted me to experience the fire movement. He was just like, nah, don't go out to Texas on your first job after graduating and buy a house. It's because I really was looking for what I could qualify, because I was like, okay, I'm making engineer money. I'm gonna go buy a house in Texas. But I didn't. And because you get into a point to where this is 2001. And so from a historical standpoint, 9/11 occurred. And so I would have been stuck with a house payment and whatever offering of resources that were there, but I would have been stuck. So my point, to use that as just an example, is that life happens. And so if you get too bogged down with other expenses and obligations, then you won't have anything to contribute to your fire movement. So that mindset of just being very frugal, but at the same time, know that that's based on a purpose, because whether you know it or not, whether you've had enough experience as an early 20s individual, but if you're in your 40s, late 30s, life happens. So the value of putting money to the side. And so that's what power we have as we've gotten older, is that I'm always pushing money to the side. And so with our younger individuals, just know that when we say life happens, it happens, and it's going to happen to everyone. It's just a fact of the universe. So always go out with a sense of a conservative nature when you spend money.
Tune in to part 2, where DeWayne will tell you what to do with the money you have been pushing aside. Thanks for joining.